5 Marines lie unconscious. One blonde woman stands, calm, not even winded. They called her Ghost 23, a call sign the Pentagon buried 3 years ago with a folded flag and a posthumous Medal of Honor. She was supposed to be dead. So how did a civilian just dismantle 5 of the Corps' best in under 30 seconds? And why does Colonel Hartley's face drain of color the moment he hears her name? This isn't about a woman proving she can fight. It's about a ghost who refused to stay buried, 8 months of Taliban captivity, and a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of command. The question isn't whether she can win. That's already answered. The question is whether anyone here is ready for the truth she brought back from the grave. What do you think happens when someone mistakes silence for weakness? Let me know in the comments below. The morning sun cut through the high windows of the Marine Corps Recruit Depot's Advanced Combat Training Facility, casting long shadows across the concrete floor that had witnessed countless battles between warriors in training. The air hung thick with the smell of sweat, rubber mats, and that particular mixture of cleaning chemicals and determination that marked every military training facility from Paris Island to Pendleton. This was sacred ground, where boys became Marines, where the weak were culled and the strong were forged into weapons of war. And into this testosterone-soaked temple of masculinity walked Sarah Mitchell, looking for all the world like she'd taken a wrong turn on her way to a corporate boardroom. She stood 5 feet 6 inches in practical flats, her blonde hair pulled back in a regulation bun that suggested military familiarity despite her civilian attire. Her clothes were unremarkable: khaki slacks, a simple blue blouse, nothing that would draw attention in any office building in America. But there was something in the way she moved, a fluid economy of motion that spoke of years of training, of muscles that remembered violence even when the mind sought peace. Every step was measured, calculated, not the careful walk of fear, but the precise movement of a predator conserving energy. Her eyes, a pale gray that shifted to blue in certain light, swept the room with the systematic precision of a sniper checking for threats. She noted exits, counted combatants, assessed weapons both conventional and improvised, all while maintaining the pleasant, neutral expression of someone merely observing a training demonstration. Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez noticed her immediately. How could he not? In 15 years of service, through 3 combat deployments and countless training cycles, he'd developed a sixth sense for threats and outsiders. This woman was both and neither. She carried herself like a civilian, but her posture whispered of drill fields and forced marches. She dressed like an office worker, but her hands bore the calluses of someone who knew intimate violence. Rodriguez was 6 feet 2 inches of Puerto Rican pride, barrel-chested and broad-shouldered, with arms that could bench press a small motorcycle. He commanded respect through presence alone, and his reputation for breaking recruits was legendary. In his world, strength was truth and weakness was sin, and women, well, women belonged in support roles, not combat zones. The facility hummed with its usual morning chaos. Heavy bags swung from chains, their leather surfaces bearing the scars of thousands of strikes. The rhythmic thud of fists on bags mixed with the sharp crack of bodies hitting mats, the grunts of exertion, and the barked commands of instructors. Along the walls hung the sacred texts of Marine Corps culture, unit photos from Iraq and Afghanistan, motivational posters with eagles and flags, honor rolls of those who'd earned the title Marine through blood and sweat. This was Rodriguez's domain, his church, and this civilian woman with her visitor's badge and clipboard was an unwelcome congregant. Rodriguez's inner circle formed a protective barrier around their leader without conscious thought. Corporal Jake Thompson, loud and eager to please, shadowed Rodriguez's every move like a loyal dog. Lance Corporal Mike Washington maintained a skeptical distance, his analytical mind always questioning but rarely challenging. Private First Class Tony Castellano, the youngest and most aggressive, practically vibrated with the need to prove himself worthy of the brotherhood. Only Corporal Ryan Murphy held back, something in his Irish eyes suggesting he saw more than he said. These were Rodriguez's apostles, and like their leader, they viewed the blonde woman's presence as an intrusion into their sacred masculine space. Sarah chose her observation point with tactical precision, though anyone watching would have seen only a woman finding a spot with a good view. She positioned herself where she could see the entire training floor while keeping her back to a wall, with clear paths to 3 different exits. The incognito operative's first rule: always appear to belong exactly where you are. The second rule: always be ready to leave. Her breathing remained steady, controlled, a meditation technique learned not in any yoga studio but in the mountains of Afghanistan where panic meant death. She watched Rodriguez demonstrate a takedown technique, noting how he telegraphed his movements, how his ego made him predictable. His form was textbook Marine Corps, which meant it was 20 years out of date and designed for battlefield intimidation rather than survival. She cataloged each flaw, each opening, each moment where proper technique could turn his strength into weakness. The gender dynamics in the room were as subtle as a sledgehammer. Conversations stuttered to a stop when Sarah moved past groups of Marines. Some offered patronizing smiles, the kind reserved for lost tourists or someone's visiting sister. Others simply turned their backs, a wall of muscle and dismissal that spoke louder than words. She was the only woman in a facility designed by men, for men, to create men. The assumption radiated from every corner. She was administrative, probably here to check boxes for some diversity initiative, certainly not someone who understood the brutal calculus of combat. Let them think what they wanted. Assumptions were just another form of camouflage, and she'd spent years perfecting the art of being unseen in plain sight. Rodriguez noticed her watching, really watching, not with the casual interest of a bureaucrat, but with the focused attention of a professional. It annoyed him in a way he couldn't quite articulate. Who was this woman to judge his techniques? What could someone who'd probably never thrown a real punch in her life possibly understand about the warrior arts? He finished his demonstration with extra force, driving his training partner into the mat hard enough to knock the wind from his lungs. The sharp slap of impact echoed through the facility, a punctuation mark on his dominance. When he looked back, the woman was still watching, her expression unreadable, her stillness somehow more disturbing than any reaction would have been. That stillness held secrets Rodriguez couldn't begin to imagine. Behind those calm gray eyes lived memories of a Hindu Kush winter, where the cold could kill faster than bullets, where Sarah had survived on pine needles and melted snow, while Taliban patrols passed within feet of her position. Her hands, folded quietly over her clipboard, had snapped necks and saved lives with equal precision. The same measured breathing that Rodriguez dismissed as civilian softness had kept her alive through torture sessions that would have broken most men. She was a ghost walking among the living, carrying skills forged in crucibles these Marines had only seen in movies. But she said nothing, revealed nothing, simply observed and catalogued and waited. The tension in the room built like storm clouds over Paris Island. Everyone could feel it, though no one could name it. Something about the woman's presence disrupted the normal flow of training, like a pebble thrown into still water. Rodriguez found himself showing off, his demonstrations becoming more elaborate, more forceful. His men responded in kind, their voices growing louder, their movements more aggressive. It was primitive pack behavior, the ritual display of dominance when territory was threatened. They didn't recognize the predator in their midst because she didn't match their image of what danger looked like. In their world, threats came in the form of other men, preferably with scars and tattoos and bad intentions. They couldn't conceive that death might wear sensible shoes and carry a visitor's badge. But the calm before the storm was about to break. Rodriguez's patience was wearing thin, and Sarah Mitchell was done being invisible. Have you ever wondered what it takes to survive when everyone thinks you're dead? Drop your thoughts below. Rodriguez's patience finally snapped like a dry twig under a boot heel. He'd watched this civilian woman observe his training for 30 minutes, her silence more irritating than any criticism could have been. In his world, respect was earned through sweat and blood, not granted to clipboard-carrying bureaucrats who probably thought combat was something that happened in video games. He stopped mid-demonstration, his massive frame turning towards Sarah with the deliberate menace of a predator marking territory. The room's energy shifted instantly, conversations dying as Marines sensed the confrontation brewing. Rodriguez cracked his knuckles, the sound sharp as gunshots in the sudden quiet, and began walking toward the woman who dared to judge warriors from the safety of the sidelines. "Ma'am," Rodriguez's voice carried the false politeness of a man who'd already decided how this would end. "You seem mighty interested in our training methods. Since you're here to evaluate us, maybe you'd like a closer look?" The invitation dripped with condescension, each word carefully chosen to highlight the absurdity of a civilian woman assessing Marine combat techniques. His squad gathered behind him, a wall of muscle and masculine pride, feeding off their leader's energy. Thompson grinned like a hyena scenting weakness. Castellano bounced on his toes, eager for the entertainment about to unfold. Even Washington, usually the voice of reason, crossed his arms, and waited for the inevitable humiliation of this outsider who'd invaded their sanctuary. Sarah looked up from her clipboard, meeting Rodriguez's gaze with eyes that held no fear, no anger, just a calm assessment that made him unexpectedly uncomfortable. She set her pen down with deliberate precision, each movement controlled and purposeful. "I'm simply observing, Sergeant. Please continue your demonstration." Her voice was quiet, professional, giving him every opportunity to back down with dignity and tact. But Rodriguez had gone too far to retreat now, his pride demanding satisfaction. The boys were watching, expecting him to put this woman in her place, to defend their brotherhood against civilian interference. What he didn't recognize was the careful way she'd already cataloged his weaknesses, the slight favor of his left knee from an old injury, the way he dropped his right shoulder before striking, the overconfidence that made him predictable. "Come on now," Rodriguez pressed, his tone shifting to mock encouragement. "Can't properly evaluate something you've never experienced. Tell you what, I'll go easy on you. Just a simple demonstration of basic defensive techniques, nothing that'll mess up that pretty blouse." The insult landed exactly as intended, drawing chuckles from his men. Thompson added his own contribution. "Bet she thinks fighting is like what she sees in movies, all choreographed and clean." Washington shook his head but said nothing, while Castellano openly laughed. "Should have sent someone who's actually been in a fight," the young Marine added, his voice carrying the casual cruelty of someone who'd never questioned his place in the pecking order. The attacks came faster now, each Marine adding to the pile on like jackals emboldened by numbers. Probably never even thrown a punch. Desk warriors always think they know better. This is why women belong in admin, not combat. Each comment was a test, pushing boundaries, waiting for her to break, to show the emotional weakness they expected from a female in their masculine domain. Sarah absorbed it all, her expression never changing, her breathing never accelerating. She'd endured far worse in Taliban captivity, where her interrogators had tried to break her with methods that would make these insults seem like poetry. But she noticed something else too. Corporal Murphy hadn't joined in, his eyes narrowed with something that might have been recognition, or at least professional curiosity. Rodriguez decided to escalate, turning to the heavy bag with exaggerated purpose. "Let me show you how real Marines train," he announced, launching into a demonstration that was more performance than technique. His strikes were powerful but wasteful, each blow designed to impress rather than incapacitate. He threw haymakers that would leave him open to any trained opponent, his form deteriorating as his ego inflated. Sarah watched him reveal every weakness in his arsenal, her trained eye catching details his own men missed, the predictable pattern of his combinations, the way he planted his feet too wide, the momentary blindness after each power strike. He was showing her exactly how to defeat him, and he didn't even know it. "There," Rodriguez finished, barely winded but playing up his exertion for effect. "That's how we do things in the Corps, but I guess that might be a bit too intense for someone used to office work." He turned back to Sarah, his chest puffed out like a rooster in a barnyard. "So what do you say, ma'am? Want to show us what you know? Give us poor jarheads some of that civilian expertise?" The challenge hung in the air like smoke from a firefight, impossible to ignore. His men formed a loose circle, cell phones appearing in hands ready to record whatever humiliation was about to unfold. They expected tears, maybe anger, certainly a hasty retreat. What they didn't expect was the way Sarah's entire demeanor shifted, subtle as a shadow moving across the wall. She stood slowly, each movement deliberate and controlled. First, she removed her watch, a military-issue piece that none of them recognized as special operations standard, and set it carefully on her clipboard. Then she looked directly at Rodriguez for the first time, really looked at him, and something in her gaze made him take an involuntary half-step back. It wasn't aggression or fear or any emotion he could name. It was the look of someone who had stared death in the face so many times that intimidation had lost all meaning. "If you insist, Sergeant," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that made the mocking laughter die in several throats. She walked toward the mat with the measured pace of someone approaching a familiar altar, her civilian clothes unable to disguise the predator's grace in her movements. The room's atmosphere changed like a barometric drop before a storm. Rodriguez felt it but couldn't name it, that primitive awareness that he'd miscalculated something fundamental. His men sensed it too, their eager anticipation curdling into uncertainty. Sarah stepped onto the mat and assumed a stance that was somehow both relaxed and ready, her weight balanced, her hands loose at her sides. She didn't adopt any recognizable fighting position, didn't telegraph her training or intentions. She simply stood there, waiting, and somehow that stillness was more menacing than any aggressive posture could have been. Rodriguez found himself analyzing her stance and coming up empty. It was nothing he'd seen before, yet it looked disturbingly effective. "Well?" Sarah's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You wanted to demonstrate defensive techniques. I'm ready when you are." The reversal was subtle but complete. Suddenly, Rodriguez wasn't the instructor showing a civilian how things worked. He was being challenged by someone whose capability remained unknown. His men waited, expecting him to dominate this mere woman who dared to accept his challenge. His reputation, his standing, his entire identity as the alpha in this pack demanded he put her in her place. But something whispered warnings in the back of his mind, some instinct honed by 3 combat tours that recognized danger even when it came wrapped in civilian clothes and spoke with a quiet voice. Rodriguez rolled his shoulders, cracked his neck, and tried to recapture his earlier confidence. "Remember, you asked for this," he said, though later he'd wonder who he was really trying to convince. He assumed his fighting stance, the one that had served him well in a dozen bar fights and countless training sessions. Across from him, Sarah remained motionless, her breathing so controlled it was barely visible. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Someone in the watching crowd whispered, "This ain't gonna end well." But whether they meant for Sarah or Rodriguez, no one could say. In that frozen moment before violence, one thing became crystal clear. Someone had made a terrible mistake, and in about 3 seconds, everyone would know who. The first strike would reveal everything, but nobody expected what happened next. What would you risk to prove that strength isn't about size? Share your thoughts. Rodriguez lunged forward with all the subtlety of a freight train, his right fist cocked back in a haymaker that had dropped dozens of recruits over the years. It was the kind of punch that looked impressive in movies, all power and no finesse, telegraphed from a mile away. Sarah didn't just dodge it, she redirected it, using Rodriguez's own momentum to guide him past her like a matador with a particularly clumsy bull. The technique was pure efficiency, minimal effort, maximum result. A finger's touch on the wrist, a slight shift of her hips, and 200 pounds of marine aggression became useless motion. Her hand touched his wrist for barely a second, just enough to alter his trajectory, and suddenly the staff sergeant was stumbling forward, off balance and confused. Before his brain could process what had happened, Sarah's elbow found his solar plexus with surgical precision. The air exploded from his lungs as her legs swept his feet from under him, and Rodriguez hit the mat with a sound like a side of beef dropping from a truck. 3 seconds. That's all it had taken to put one of Paris Island's most feared instructors on his back, gasping like a landed fish. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by Rodriguez's wheezing attempts to remember how breathing worked. Then Thompson roared to life, charging forward with a cry of, "Lucky shot!" that echoed off the facility's walls. He came at Sarah with the graceless aggression of a man who'd learned to fight in bar brawls, all grabbing hands in brute force. Sarah flowed around him like water around a rock, her movements economical and precise. Each technique was a lesson learned in blood. Compress the joint here, apply pressure there, let physics and anatomy do the work. She caught his reaching arm, twisted it into a joint lock that sent lightning through his nervous system, and applied pressure to a point behind his elbow that made his whole body go rigid. Thompson's tough guy facade crumbled into a whimper as he tapped frantically against her arm, surrendering in under 5 seconds. Castellano didn't wait for his turn. The youngest Marine's fury overrode any tactical thinking he might have possessed. He came at Sarah with the primal scream, throwing wild punches fueled by rage and humiliation. Where Rodriguez had been predictable and Thompson clumsy, Castellano was simply undisciplined. Sarah didn't even seem to move quickly. She simply wasn't where his fists expected her to be. The void technique, be where the attack isn't. Let aggression exhaust itself against empty air. She slipped inside his guard like smoke through a keyhole, and her palm strike to a nerve cluster in his shoulder sent him to his knees. A second precise strike to a pressure point at the base of his skull dropped him completely, his body going limp as his nervous system temporarily shut down in self-defense. He hit the mat confused and terrified, unable to understand how this small woman had switched him off like a light. Then the door exploded open, and everything changed. The door to the facility crashed open with enough force to rattle the weapons displays on the walls. Colonel James Hartley stood in the entrance, his weathered face cycling through expressions of disbelief, recognition, and something that might have been guilt. At 62, Hartley carried his years like armor, each line earned in service to his country. His chest bore ribbons that told stories of Fallujah, Kandahar, and a dozen other hellholes where American warriors had bled for uncertain causes. The Navy Cross, the Silver Star, the Purple Heart with 2 clusters, a resume written in valor and sacrifice. But it was the way his face went pale, the way his lips formed words that wouldn't come, that made every Marine in the room freeze. When Colonel Hartley finally spoke, his voice cracked like a teenager's. Ghost 2-3. Sarah turned at the designation, her body snapping to attention with the automatic precision of muscle memory. Sir, she replied, and in that single word lived years of training, of discipline, of a military bearing that civilian clothes couldn't disguise. The Marines who were still conscious exchanged confused glances. Ghost 2-3 was a legend, a cautionary tale whispered in special operations circles. A female operator who'd done the impossible, who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd been buried with full honors after a mission that had gone catastrophically wrong. Yet here she stood, very much alive, having just demolished 3 Marines without breaking a sweat. Hartley's next words fell into the silence like grenades. Gentlemen, meet Captain Sarah Mitchell, formerly Ghost 2-3 Special Activities Division. And yes, before you ask, she's supposed to be dead. The revelation rippled through the room like shockwaves from an explosion. Rodriguez, who'd managed to prop himself up on one elbow, stared at Sarah with a mixture of awe and horror. He'd just attacked a genuine war hero, a woman who'd earned medals most Marines only dreamed of. But Hartley wasn't finished. His voice took on the cadence of a briefing, professional and detached, as if emotional distance could somehow mitigate what he was about to reveal. Operation Blackwater, Afghanistan, October 2019. Captain Mitchell led a 5-person team into Taliban-controlled territory to extract Marine intelligence officer Captain David Chen, who'd been captured during a convoy ambush. The intel suggested a narrow window before Chen would be moved to Pakistan, beyond our reach. Hartley paused, his eyes locked on Sarah, who remained at attention but whose jaw had tightened at the memory. The mission was compromised from the start. Someone had sold them out, fed their route directly to Taliban commanders. When Ghost Team entered the target compound, they found 40 fighters waiting instead of the dozen they'd been briefed to expect. It was a killing floor, designed to eliminate one of our most effective special operations units. The Marines in the room had gone completely still, even their breathing subdued as they recognized they were hearing something usually locked behind classification stamps. This wasn't barracks gossip or exaggerated war stories. This was the real thing, the kind of operation that never made the news. Captain Mitchell's team held their position for 6 hours against overwhelming odds, Hartley continued, his voice growing rougher with each word. 6 hours of continuous combat while Mitchell searched for Captain Chen. When she finally found him, he was already dead, had been for days. The whole thing was a setup, designed to draw out our best operators and eliminate them. Mitchell ordered her team to extract while she provided cover. They made it 3 clicks before the compound was hit by multiple RPGs. Last anyone heard from Ghost 2-3 was her final transmission. Get them home. The building came down on top of her. We found blood, her rifle, part of her gear. Taliban sources confirmed they had her body. We held the memorial service 3 weeks later. Sarah finally spoke, her voice carrying the weight of memories that would never fade. My team died getting me that intel, Colonel. Lisa Chen held a sniper position alone for 40 minutes, calling out targets even after she'd been shot twice. Marcus Williams rigged improvised explosives from cooking fuel and fertilizer, bought us our escape route with his life. Jake Rodriguez, no relation to the sergeant here, kept treating wounded even after shrapnel had torn through his medical supplies and into his chest. Tommy Kowalski stayed on the radio, coordinating air support he knew would come too late, making sure someone would know what happened to us. They died believing their sacrifice meant something, that the mission mattered. They died not knowing it was all a lie. The emotion in her voice was controlled but present, like a river running deep beneath ice. Every Marine in the room understood that tone. It was the sound of survivor's guilt mixed with rage, of someone who'd trade every medal and commendation just to have their people back. Hartley picked up the narrative, filling in the blanks. Sarah's pain wouldn't let her voice. Captain Mitchell survived the building collapse with multiple injuries. The Taliban captured her, held her for 8 months. The details of her captivity remain classified, but I can tell you that what she endured would have broken most operators, male or female. She escaped during a prisoner transfer when Taliban forces were ambushed by rival fighters, spent 6 months fighting her way back to friendly lines, living off the land, moving only at night. When she finally reached Forward Operating Base Chapman, she weighed 90 pounds and had injuries that should have killed her 3 times over. Hartley's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. First thing she said was, "I need to report a traitor in our ranks." That's when we learned the truth. General Harrison Morrison, Deputy Director of Pentagon Special Operations, had sold out Ghost Team. He'd been feeding intelligence to Pakistani ISI, who shared it with the Taliban in exchange for safe passage for opium shipments. Morrison needed Ghost Team eliminated because they'd stumbled onto his network during an earlier operation. Sarah's survival was the one thing he hadn't planned for. The revelation hung in the air like poison gas. But Morrison's betrayal was just the beginning. The weight of the revelation pressed down on the room like a physical force. These Marines understood betrayal by the enemy. That was part of war. But betrayal by one of their own, by someone wearing stars on his shoulders and sitting in the Pentagon, that shook the foundations of everything they believed in. Rodriguez found his voice, though it came out strangled. "Why didn't you expose him? Why let her be listed as KIA?" Hartley's expression darkened further. Because Morrison had connections throughout the military and intelligence communities. Exposing him without ironclad proof would have resulted in Sarah's death. A training accident, a suicide, something untraceable. So we made a deal. Sarah Mitchell would stay dead, and in exchange, Morrison would believe his secret was safe while we built our case. Sarah moved for the first time since coming to attention, her posture relaxing slightly as she addressed the room. "I've spent 3 years as a ghost, unable to contact my family, unable to honor my fallen team publicly, unable to exist in any meaningful way. But I've also spent those years training, preparing, gathering evidence. Every technique I used on you today, I learned from someone who didn't make it home. Thompson, that joint lock? Lisa Chen taught me that 2 weeks before she died. Castellano, those pressure points? Marcus Williams spent hours drilling them into me, said they'd save my life someday. Rodriguez, the throw I used? Jake Rodriguez perfected it, said it would work on anyone regardless of size advantage. I carry their lessons because I can't carry their bodies home." The emotional impact was visible on every face. These Marines, who moments ago had mocked her as weak, now saw the truth. She wasn't just skilled, she was a living memorial to fallen warriors, each technique a tribute to someone who died believing in something larger than themselves. Murphy, who'd been silent throughout, finally spoke. "The review of training protocols. You're not really here for that, are you?" Sarah's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, I'm definitely here for that. Your current hand-to-hand combat training is 20 years out of date and would get you killed against any competent opponent. But you're right that there's more. Morrison is still operating, still selling out American forces for profit. This visit is part of something larger, exposing not just him, but his entire network." Hartley nodded grimly. 3 weeks ago, we intercepted communications suggesting Morrison is planning something big. He knows the investigation is closing in, needs one last score before disappearing. We believe he's going to sell the identities and locations of all special operations units in Afghanistan to the highest bidder. Every SEAL, every Green Beret, every Marine Raider, their families, their home addresses, everything. We brought Captain Mitchell back because she's the only one who survived his last betrayal. She knows his methods, his contacts, his weaknesses. And officially, she doesn't exist, which makes her the perfect weapon against him. Rodriguez struggled to his feet, his earlier arrogance replaced by something approaching reverence. "Ma'am, Christ, I don't even know what to say. We disrespected a hero, someone who sacrificed everything." Sarah cut him off with a gesture. "You didn't know, Sergeant, and frankly, your disrespect was exactly what I needed. It's been 3 years since anyone treated me like a normal person instead of a tragedy or a ghost. Your challenge let me honor my team's memory in the only way I know how, by proving their techniques work, that their sacrifice created something lasting." She looked around the room, meeting each Marine's eyes. "But now you know the truth. The question is, what are you going to do with it? Do you think she made the right choice? Would you trust an institution that betrayed you once?" The transformation in the training facility was immediate and profound. Rodriguez, the man who'd moments ago embodied every stereotype about women in combat, stood before Sarah with tears threatening to spill from his eyes. His voice, usually booming with authority, came out barely above a whisper. "Ma'am, I've been an instructor here for 5 years, telling myself I was preparing Marines for combat. But what you just showed us, those techniques could save lives, real lives. My little brother ships out to Syria next month. and the hand-to-hand training he got here wouldn't keep him alive against a determined enemy with a knife. He swallowed hard, pride warring with necessity. I'm asking you, not ordering. Will you teach us? Will you help us honor your team by making sure our Marines come home? The request rippled through the gathered Marines like a stone dropped in still water. Thompson, still rubbing his elbow where Sarah had locked it, stepped forward. I've got a confession, ma'am. My sister wanted to join the Corps 3 years ago. I talked her out of it, told her combat was no place for women, that she'd just get people killed trying to protect her. After what I just saw, he couldn't finish, shame coloring his features. Washington nodded slowly, his analytical mind processing the implications. We've been training for the last war while the enemy evolved. Those pressure points, the joint manipulations using an opponent's strength against them, that's not in any manual I've studied. Even Castellano, youngest and most hot-headed, had been humbled into reflection. My mom always said the quiet ones were the most dangerous. Guess I should have listened. But their transformation was about to be tested. The doors burst open again, and the devil himself walked in. The facility's main doors burst open again, this time admitting a phalanx of Pentagon brass led by a man whose very presence seemed to suck warmth from the room. General Harrison Morrison stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, his silver hair perfect despite the South Carolina humidity, his uniform bearing enough ribbons to stock a craft store. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd never met a problem he couldn't bury in bureaucracy or blood. Behind him came 5 officers Sarah recognized with a chill that had nothing to do with air conditioning. Morrison's personal security detail, all special operators who'd sold their souls for promotion and profit. Their eyes locked onto her immediately, recognition flashing beneath professional masks. Morrison's voice filled the space with practiced authority. Colonel Hartley, I received disturbing reports of an unauthorized civilian conducting combatives training with our Marines. Imagine my surprise when I learned this civilian matches the description of someone who's been impersonating a deceased service member. His smile was cold as Arctic wind. Captain Sarah Mitchell died in Afghanistan 3 years ago. I personally signed off on her Medal of Honor recommendation. Whoever this woman is, she's either suffering from severe psychological trauma or perpetrating stolen valor of the highest order. He turned to his security detail. Detain her for psychiatric evaluation. If she resists, well, we can't have unstable individuals endangering our Marines. The Marines in the room bristled at the threat, unconsciously forming a protective perimeter around Sarah. Rodriguez stepped forward, his massive frame blocking Morrison's view. With respect, General, this woman just demonstrated techniques that could revolutionize our combat training. Whatever her name is, she's no threat to anyone here. Morrison's eyes narrowed dangerously. Stand aside, Sergeant, or I'll have you brought up on charges of insubordination. But Rodriguez didn't move, and one by one, other Marines joined him. Thompson, Washington, Murphy, even Castellano. They formed a wall of muscle and determination between Sarah and Morrison's team. Sarah gently touched Rodriguez's arm, moving past the protective line with calm purpose. It's all right, Sergeant. The General and I have unfinished business. She faced Morrison directly, and something in her expression made him take an involuntary step back. Hello, Harrison. You look well for someone with so much blood on his hands. Tell me, do you still have nightmares about Operation Blackwater? Or did you sleep soundly knowing Ghost Team died believing in the mission you sold to the Taliban? The accusation hung in the air like cordite after a firefight. Morrison's security detail tensed, hands moving toward concealed weapons, but the room full of Marines had them outnumbered 5-1. Morrison recovered his composure with visible effort. I don't know who you are, but Captain Mitchell is dead. I attended her memorial service, comforted her family, ensured her sacrifice was properly honored. This charade is beneath contempt. But sweat had begun beading on his forehead despite the climate control. Sarah smiled, the expression sharp as a K-bar knife. Did you comfort my mother before or after your intermediaries confirmed the Taliban had my body? Was it before or after you transferred $5 million to your Cayman Islands account? I'm curious about the timeline, Harrison. You see, I had 8 months in Taliban custody to piece together exactly how you betrayed us, and 6 months walking out of Afghanistan to decide what I'd do when I found you. The revelation that Sarah had specific knowledge of Morrison's financial crimes sent visible shockwaves through his security detail. These men had thought they were protecting a Pentagon official from a delusional woman. Now they were calculating whether their loyalty to Morrison outweighed their survival instincts. Sarah continued, her voice carrying the quiet authority of truth. Account number 7942618 at Butterfield Bank, Grand Cayman. Deposits made 3 days after Operation Blackwater, 2 days after the convoy ambush that killed Captain Chen, and monthly thereafter for services rendered. Should I continue, or would you prefer to discuss this somewhere more private? Morrison's mask finally cracked completely. Take her down. That's a direct order. His security detail hesitated for a crucial second, torn between training and self-preservation. That second was all Sarah needed. The first operator reached for his weapon, but Sarah was already moving. The ghost dance. 5 opponents, 20 seconds, no wasted motion. Each strike flowed into the next like water finding its path downhill. She flowed between them like smoke, using their own tactical formation against them. A strike to one man's wrist sent his pistol spinning across the floor. An elbow to another's temple dropped him before he could clear leather. The third tried to grapple her, relying on size advantage, but found himself airborne courtesy of a throw that would have made her dead teammate Jake Rodriguez proud. The fourth and fifth attacked simultaneously, trained operators working in concert, but Sarah had learned to fight multiple opponents in Taliban caves where surrender meant death. She used one attacker's momentum to crash him into his partner, following up with precise strikes that left both men groaning on the concrete. 20 seconds. 5 elite operators down, and Sarah wasn't even breathing hard. The Marines watching erupted in spontaneous applause, but Sarah kept her eyes on Morrison. The general had pulled his sidearm, pointing it at her with hands that trembled despite his combat experience. "You're dead," he screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "I saw the reports. The building came down. No one could have survived." Sarah took a step toward him, ignoring the weapon. "You're right. Sarah Mitchell did die in that building. The woman who believed in chain of command, who trusted her superiors, who thought sacrifice meant something, she's gone. What came back from Afghanistan is something else. Something you created, Harrison. I'm your ghost, your guilt, your reckoning." Morrison's finger tightened on the trigger, but Colonel Hartley's voice cracked across the space. "Lower your weapon, General." "That's an order." Morrison spun toward the colonel. "You don't give me orders, Hartley. I'm Pentagon brass while you're just a field commander past his prime." Hartley smiled coldly. "Actually, Harrison, as of 0600 this morning, you're under investigation for treason, murder, and conduct unbecoming an officer. The Senate Intelligence Committee has been very interested in the evidence Captain Mitchell gathered during her death and resurrection. Your accounts are frozen, your allies have abandoned you, and your choices are simple. Surrender now and face trial, or resist and face the woman you tried to kill." The facility had become an arena. Marines pressed against the walls to give the combatants room while maintaining a barrier Morrison couldn't escape through. Sarah stood perfectly still in the center, patient as death itself. Morrison's eyes darted around the room, searching for allies and finding only condemnation. These Marines might not know all the details, but they recognized truth when they heard it. They'd all known officers who'd traded honor for advancement, who'd sacrificed troops for politics. Now they faced the ultimate example, and their choice was clear. "Ghost 2-3, Rodriguez shouted suddenly. "Ghost 2-3, Thompson picked up the chant. "Ghost 2-3, Washington and Murphy joined in. "Ghost 2-3, even Castellano, voice cracking with emotion. "Ghost 2-3, the chant built like thunder, 40 Marines honoring a warrior who'd returned from the dead to face her betrayer. Morrison saw his fate in their eyes, understood that his power had evaporated like morning dew under Afghanistan's sun. He made his choice, spinning the pistol toward his own temple, but Sarah moved faster than thought. She crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat, her hand catching his wrist and redirecting the weapon skyward. The gunshot was deafening in the enclosed space, but the bullet found only ceiling. Sarah's other hand struck with surgical precision, and Morrison collapsed, unconscious but alive. "No," she said quietly, standing over his fallen form. "You don't get to escape into death, Harrison. You're going to live and face trial and spend your remaining years in a cell thinking about the good people you killed for money." Federal agents flooded the facility moments later, Hartley's signal bringing FBI, military police, and representatives from the Senate Intelligence Committee. As they secured Morrison and his accomplices, Sarah found herself surrounded by Marines seeking wisdom, techniques, understanding. She taught them as her team had taught her, each lesson a living memorial. Rodriguez learned the throw that had been Jake Rodriguez's signature move. Thompson mastered the joint lock Lisa Chen had perfected. Washington absorbed the strategic principles Marcus Williams had lived by. Even young Castellano found wisdom in the patience Tommy Kowalski had preached. The training facility became a classroom where the dead taught the living through the ghost who carried their knowledge. But the story wasn't over. Morrison's confession would reveal something that changed everything. What other military conspiracies do you think exist in the shadows? Like and subscribe to discover more untold stories of heroes fighting corruption. The interrogation of General Morrison revealed a conspiracy that reached deeper into America's military-industrial complex than anyone had imagined. Under federal custody and facing life in prison, Morrison broke within 72 hours, but his confession raised more questions than it answered. He wasn't the architect of the network that had sold out American forces. He was middle management, a cog in a machine that spanned continents and decades. The real puppet masters operated from shadows so deep that even Morrison only knew them by code names: architect, banker, merchant, scholar. These figures controlled a web of corruption that treated American soldiers as commodities to be traded, their lives valued only in the currency of power and profit. Sarah sat in a secure conference room deep within the Pentagon, surrounded by maps marked with red pins indicating compromised operations spanning 20 years. Each pin represented American blood spilled for someone's profit margin. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Somalia. Everywhere American forces had bled, the network had profited. Hartley sat across from her, his face aged a decade in 3 days. Morrison's testimony confirms what you suspected, he said quietly. Your father's death in Somalia wasn't random militia violence. He'd discovered the network's existence, was gathering evidence when his convoy was hit. They've been operating since at least the Gulf War, maybe longer. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her father, the man who'd taught her to fight, who'd instilled in her the warrior code that had kept her alive, he'd died fighting the same shadow war she now faced. Morrison's final gambit came during his 4th day of interrogation. Desperate to bargain for a reduced sentence, he revealed the existence of a kill list maintained by the network, a comprehensive database of every American operator who'd ever stumbled onto their activities. The list included active duty personnel, veterans, even family members who might have inherited dangerous knowledge. Sarah's name was there, marked as terminated after Operation Blackwater. But there were dozens of others marked as pending or active, men and women who didn't know they were living on borrowed time. Morrison smiled through his shackles as he delivered the killing blow. You saved yourself, Mitchell, but can you save them all? The network has assets in every branch, every unit. By the time you identify them, half those names will be as dead as you're supposed to be. The Marines at Parris Island had become Sarah's unofficial unit, training in her techniques while providing security for the ongoing investigation. Rodriguez had transformed from skeptic to true believer, his natural leadership skills now channeled toward protecting Sarah and spreading her combat philosophy. It was Thompson who made the connection that changed everything. Ma'am, he said during an evening training session, that pressure point technique you taught us, I've seen it before. My cousin Danny was force recon, came back from Syria talking about this ghost instructor who appeared at their FOB, taught them techniques that saved half his unit in an ambush, then vanished. Said the instructor wore a scarf that covered everything but the eyes, spoke in whispers, called themselves Shadow 7. Sarah froze. Shadow 7 was another ghost team call sign belonging to her sniper Lisa Chen. But Lisa had died in Afghanistan. Sarah had seen her fall. Unless... The possibility sparked a desperate hope that Sarah barely dared acknowledge. If she had survived the impossible, who else might have done the same? She began investigating other mysterious instructors who'd appeared at American bases over the past 3 years. A demolitions expert in Kuwait who revolutionized IED detection protocols before disappearing. A medic in Djibouti who taught combat casualty techniques that increased survival rates by 40%, then vanished into the desert. A communications specialist in Germany who upgraded cybersecurity across NATO forces, then ceased to exist. Each description matched one of her dead teammates, but that was impossible. She'd heard their final transmissions, mourned at their memorials. Yet here she was, Ghost 23, very much alive despite her own official death. The encrypted message changed everything. Ghost Team wasn't dead. They were hunting. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Castellano, the youngest Marine who'd initially mocked her, had become obsessed with signals intelligence after learning about Tommy Kowalski's expertise. He'd been monitoring dark web chatter related to military operations when he discovered something extraordinary. "Captain," He burst into the training facility at midnight, laptop in hand. I found something. Encrypted messages using Ghost Team protocols, but they're current, from this week. The encryption keys match your unit's classified codes. Someone's using callsign Spectre 6, and they're warning about an imminent attack on this base. Ma'am, Spectre 6 was... Sarah finished for him, her voice barely a whisper. Marcus Williams, my demolitions expert, but he died in Afghanistan. Castellano shook his head. Ma'am, with all due respect, so did you. The message contained coordinates and a time, 0300 hours, location Tango 7, the abandoned warehouse district east of the base. Sarah knew it was likely a trap, that the network could be using her hope against her. But she also knew that Marcus Williams had created the encryption protocol himself, had built-in signatures that no enemy could replicate. She made her decision, but she wouldn't go alone. Rodriguez and his Marines insisted on providing backup, understanding that this could be either the greatest reunion or the deadliest ambush. They moved through the South Carolina darkness like wraiths, every sense alert for danger. The warehouse loomed before them, its broken windows like dead eyes watching their approach. Inside, shadows danced in the moonlight filtering through holes in the roof. Sarah gave hand signals, positioning her Marines at strategic points before moving deeper into the structure. A figure emerged from the darkness, tall and broad-shouldered, moving with the controlled power she remembered. When he stepped into a shaft of moonlight, Sarah's breath caught. Marcus Williams stood before her, scarred but alive, his eyes holding the same haunted determination she saw in her own mirror. "Hello, Ghost," he said softly. "Took you long enough to find us." Behind him, more figures emerged. Lisa Chen, her sniper's eyes still sharp despite a prosthetic left arm. Jake Rodriguez, moving stiffly from injuries but moving nonetheless. Tommy Kowalski, his boyish face now marked by burns, but his smile unchanged. Ghost Team lived, broken but unbroken, betrayed but not beaten. Ghost Team's survival explanation was elegantly simple. The Taliban had kept them alive for ransom, but when the U.S. government declared them dead and refused to negotiate, they were sold to Pakistani intelligence as bargaining chips. Each member had escaped at different times over 3 years, using their specialized skills to survive and regroup while gathering intelligence on the network that betrayed them. The reunion was brief, necessity overriding emotion. Marcus explained quickly. Morrison's people left us for dead, but Taliban medicine men have their own code. They kept us alive for ransom, but when no one came, they sold us to Pakistani intelligence. We've spent 3 years working our way back, hitting the network where we could, trying to find out who survived. When we learned you were alive and Morrison was arrested, we knew it was time to come home. But Lisa interrupted, her voice urgent. Sarah, Morrison was just one tentacle. The network knows we're alive now, all of us. They're mobilizing everything to eliminate us and everyone we've contacted. This base, these Marines, Hartley, they're all targets now. We've got maybe 6 hours before they hit this place with everything they've got. Sarah felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders again, but this time she wasn't alone. She had her team, scarred but skilled, and she had 40 Marines who'd learned that strength came in many forms. The network had made a fatal error. They'd created their own worst enemy by trying to kill Ghost Team. Now 5 operators who'd survived the unsurvivable, who'd learned to fight without support, without resources, without hope, had reunited with one purpose, to destroy those who traded American lives for profit. Sarah looked at her assembled forces, veteran operators and young Marines united by purpose. They think we're ghosts, she said quietly. Inconvenient spirits to be exorcised. They're about to learn that some ghosts carry guns, and the dead don't forgive. As dawn approached, Sarah Mitchell stood in the Paris Island training facility, surrounded by warriors both living and presumed dead. The network's attack would come soon, but for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't fighting alone. Rodriguez and his Marines had chosen their side, understanding that sometimes honor demanded standing against the very institutions you'd sworn to serve. Ghost Team had reformed, each member bringing skills honed by survival and sharpened by betrayal. The battle ahead would determine more than their survival. It would decide whether the network's corruption would continue claiming American lives, or whether 5 ghosts could bring justice to those who thought themselves untouchable. The war for the soul of American military honor was about to begin, and Sarah Mitchell, Ghost 2-3, intended to win it. Morrison had called her dead, and he was right. The trusting soldier who'd believed in chain of command was gone. In her place stood something far more dangerous, a warrior who'd learned that sometimes you had to destroy the system to save it, who understood that loyalty to principles outweighed loyalty to institutions, who knew that the greatest threats often wore friendly uniforms. As the first sirens began wailing across the base, signaling an alert that would bring either revelation or destruction, Sarah checked her weapon and smiled. Some battles you fought for country, some for honor. This one, she'd fight for the ghosts who'd refused to stay buried, and for every American warrior who deserved better than betrayal. The silence of the experienced had spoken louder than any boast or threat. Now it was time for action. Ghost Team was going to war one last time, and heaven help those who stood in their way. The network had created its own nemesis, and retribution had come home wearing the faces of the dead. In the end, it would be proven once and for all. The silence of those who have truly fought carries more weight than 1,000 words from those who only pretend to understand sacrifice.